All right. Well, we will call to order the Bedford Township Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for June 7th. We will first go and introduce the members and representatives. So we'll start with staff.
Jody Rector, Planning and Zoning.
Katrina Ingram, Planning and Zoning.
Dennis Kohler, Building Inspector. Dennis Kohler, Building Inspector.
Joe Gore, Bedford Township Trustee, Liaison to BZA.
Matthew Anger, Planning Commission Representative.
Kyle Dersh, Vice Chairman.
Jake Lake, Chair. All right, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you would all stand and face a flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Rector, if you would please call the roll.
Mr. Anger.
Here.
Mr. Dersh.
Aye.
Mr. Gore.
Here.
Mr. Lake.
Here.
And Mr. Wilson is not in attendance.
Move on to the next item, which is the approval for tonight's agenda. So I'll look for a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll go ahead and make a motion to approve the agenda for tonight's meeting on June 7th, 2021.
We have a motion and we have support. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And then opposed. We'll move on to the next item, which is approval of the minutes of our May 5th, 2021 meeting. If everyone's had a chance to read the minutes and you are attending on that meeting, anyone would like to make a motion that we approve the minutes?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes and as submitted.
I'll support that.
We have a motion, we have support. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. There are none, no nays, so we're going to move on to the next item, which is new business. We have a pretty packed agenda, so we'll try to move along as quickly as we can with making sure that we also get all of the data important to make the decisions. First is an appeal of Dan Evans on 6280 South Dixie Highway, requesting a plus or minus 2.5 foot fence height variance to construct an approximately 20-foot section of 6 foot tall privacy fence. And then also looking for a plus or minus 4.5 foot fence height variance to construct an 8 foot tall privacy fence, and also a 2 foot fence height variance to construct an 8 foot tall privacy fence. That was hard for me to get out tonight. Apologize for that. If anyone would like to make a motion that we open the public hearing, we'll entertain that.
I make a motion we open the public hearing.
Support that.
We have a motion, we have support. All in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. Ms. Rector, if you wouldn't mind, please providing a summary.
Yes. Again, the applicant is Dan Evans. He is representative for his father, who has recently deceased, Marion Evans. The property is in a trust. Parcel number 5802-101-02400, 6280 South Dixie Highway, Erie, Michigan 48133, located in Bedford Township. The applicant is seeking to construct along the southern property line a 6 foot privacy fence and approximately 20-foot section of the front yard, and an 8 foot fence in the remainder of the front yard, and an 8 foot fence in the side yard, per section 400.1912 2 Number 1, fences. Fences within a front yard shall not exceed 3.5 feet in height and shall be restricted to decorative fences. And per section 400.1912, 2A, number 2, fences within a side yard or rear yard shall not exceed 6 feet in height and shall not be extended beyond the front building line or required front yard setback, whichever is greater. Therefore, the applicant is seeking a 2.5-foot height variance to construct a plus or minus 20-foot section of a 6-foot fence in the front yard and a 4.5-foot height variance to construct an 8-foot fence in the remainder of the front yard and a 2-foot height variance to construct an 8-foot fence in the side yard. The applicant noted in his letter that proposed fence will be constructed of tan vinyl PVC and will provide a barrier from the neighboring property to the south. The applicant indicated due to the lack of maintenance and all the animals continuously utilizing his property, he sees no other way to protect his property than to request to install a privacy fence on the entire south property line. At this time, no letters or calls of objection have been received. However, the applicant has supplied signatures of no objection from 5 of the surrounding properties. Should the variance request be granted, the variances required are a 2.5-foot height variance to install approximately 20 feet section of a 6-foot fence in the front yard, a 4.5-foot height variance to install approximately 6 feet, a 6-foot fence in the remainder of the front yard, and a 2-foot height variance to install 8-foot fence within the side yard. Requested variances are located all on the south property line. And just for a little bit of clarification, anything within the front building line is considered a front yard. So even though it's all on the south side, once it encroaches in front of the front building line, it's actually considered the front yard. So that gives a little bit of clarification of why there's 2 separate requests. There's approximately 20 feet from the road right-of-way. He'd like to install 6-foot tall privacy fence. And then the remainder to the front building line of the home would be an 8-foot fence, and then the remainder of the side yard and to the back of the property would be 8 foot, where 6 feet would be permitted.
Thank you, Mr. Welling. Mr. Evans, I know Jody did a nice job of giving us the details of what you're looking for tonight. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, everything's there.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I will also open up if there's anyone that would like to make public comment on Mr. Evans' appeal for the property on South Dixie. Please do so now. I'll ask Mr. Welling if we have anybody that would like to make a public comment or waiting in queue to make a comment. Okay, thank you. While we're waiting for that, I will ask if there's any discussion or questions for the applicant. I will start off with a quick question for Mr. Evans, just to try and ask some questions and understand the rationale behind the fence. Read in there that you had some issues with animals and some unsightliness. Question I would have is, you know, were attempts made with authorities to be able to keep the animals off your property? Has that been a part of the process?
Not at all. It's just, this has been ongoing for quite some time. I've lived here my entire life, and nothing has ever been done with that property next door unless I've done it.
Gotcha. And then the second question, why an 8-foot tall fence instead of a 6-foot tall?
To block out the, are the pictures there in front of you?
Yes, I've seen the pictures.
6 foot wouldn't, 6 foot won't block it out.
So, Mr. Welling, I don't know if you're able to find out if there were any public comment. Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you. If there's anyone on that would like to make public comment about the property on South Dixie and the variance request for a fence, please state your name and address and make your comments. Okay, thanks. Hello, do we have a caller?
Yes, hi, Tim Churchill calling in.
Hi,
And
Tim.
on behalf of Mulch King.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, we're not to that point yet, so I'll have you call back in a little bit. We're actually on still on the first item of business tonight.
Okay, how soon do you think I should call in?
I would say give it a good 30 minutes or so.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Seeing that I don't believe we have any public comment right now, I would look for a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll move to close the public hearing.
I would second that. This is Jeff Wilson.
All right. We got a motion and we got a support. All in favor, please state aye.
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 All right. There are no opposed. Public hearing is closed, so we'll open it up for further discussion and or questions for Ms. Rector or his applicant. Mr. Anger?
Has there been any support or an on-support about from the neighbors, the direct neighbors? I see that there's 5 letters. Are any of those people the direct neighbors of the property?
Judy Ward.
I'm sorry, if you look at the third page, it says letter of no objections. I don't know if you can see them. You can see that they're directly north of it have signed off on the letters of no objection.
Or any of them
Also directly south of the other property.
Yeah, is there any of them directly south?
Pardon me?
Are any of the letters of no objection from to the south of the property that they're trying to put the fence on?
Yes, there's the green property, and then you have 6258, 6260 would be south of it.
My question was, did we have any support from that property that is directly south?
Well,
The affected parcel.
I do not believe that was ever, it was not supplied to us. Mr. Evans, he's speaking of property directly south of you. Have you spoken to them? And did they have any
The
objections?
apartment?
Yes.
No, nothing was ever discussed with them. They're all renters. I attempted to get a hold of the owner, or I should say the maintenance of the property. He's somebody that lives up north, and I did not have any success contacting him, so I just let it go.
Just to clarify, the applicant's yard is the yellow box.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Gore, you had a question?
Yeah, that house is, I know I'm familiar with the residence that he's talking about. I mean, it's definitely some blight issues and things like that. I've been out there, my former profession, on calls, and I'm for granting him the variance to give him some privacy and some peace.
I would agree with Mr. Gore. It looks like there's been multiple attempts to try to rectify the situation, but no remedy at this point. And without any remedy there, you know, I'm thinking about some practical difficulties. It's the views for the near properties, not under the control of the owner, remove opportunities for unwanted animals, plenty of local support. And then my last practical difficulty was unable to contact current property owner to try to remedy the situation.
I would tend to agree with that, Mr. Lake. Quite unusual, I think, and I know in the last few years we've not seen this instance of wanting to put a fence in your front yard, but I can understand the difficulties and the issues that they're having with this subject property.
Feels we've got plenty of support. Is there anyone that's prepared to make a motion?
Let me. I'm working on it. I'm getting back to it.
No problem, Mr. Gore.
Yes, all items on a BZA meeting for a variance request. Each individual item will be a public hearing.
All right, I'll take a crack at the motion. I'm just going to read from what's already presented. I'll make a motion to grant the variant to the applicant seeking to construct along the southern property line a 6-foot fence and a 20-foot section of the front yard, an 8-foot fence in the remainder of the front yard, an 8-foot fence in the side yard per section 400.191.2A.
All right. Ms. Gore, do you have some of the rationale behind the motion?
Well, like we stated, there's blight issues, there's animal issues, ongoing, can't get a hold of the property owner issues to get it cleaned up. This is an ongoing problem. So I think to grant the variance for, I guess, peace of mind for the property owner, for the applicant.
We have a motion. Any support or friendly amendments?
We need to list the property number just for the record. Yeah, so I'll just a friendly amendment to add 580210102400, just the official.
Thank you, Mr. Anger. All right. Was that also your support?
Yes.
Okay. We have a motion. We have a support. Mr. Rector, if you would call the roll, please.
Mr. Gore,
Aye.
Mr. Ager,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Mr. Dersch,
Aye.
Mr. Lake.
Yes. Thank
Motion
you.
carried.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you.
All right.
What do I need at this point? Are you going to send me something? I have to contact American Fence Company.
As soon as we get the minutes finished, we can send him an unofficial copy until the next meeting, but there is no permit required for a fence, but I will make sure that he has the information that it was approved to continue to move forward.
All right.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. We'll move on to the next item, which is the appeal of Megan and Paul. And Mr. Rector, help me if I pronounce the name incorrectly, but I believe it's Sherwalzinski.
I believe you are. I believe you're right.
Okay. Okay. And that is the property at 173 West Rouk Road in Petersburg, Michigan. They're requesting a variance to construct an 80 by 120 foot riding arena and a 26 by 38 foot accessory building, both to be located in a front yard. And with the variance permit, a 1 family dwelling quarters to be attached to an existing accessory building. If someone would like to make a motion, we open the public hearing, will be entertained.
I'll go ahead and make a motion within the public hearing at 4173 West Rock Road.
Do we have support?
Support.
All right. All in favor, please state aye.
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 We have none opposed. We'll move on to the next piece. Mr. Rector, if you wouldn't mind, please providing a summary.
Yes. Again, the applicant is Megan and Paul Shawowski, 4173 West Rock Road, parcel 5802-006-01220, approximately 11.75 acres, agriculturally zoned. The parcel has 328.4 feet of frontage and a depth of 1,411.86 feet and approximately 11.75 acres. There is an existing dwelling and an existing accessory building in the front yard developed on the site. The existing accessory building within the front yard was granted a variance on December 20th, 1993, where the applicant at that time requested to live in the attached garage area of the new dwelling while the rest of the home was being built, as all utilities were installed, and to allow for the accessory building to maintain in the front yard and build by the shared pond on site. The home layout, I supplied the home layout. The issue with that was the building permit was submitted for the new dwelling, and that is when the variance had to be sought, because once the building official at that time went out for an inspection, the accessory building was already existing on the front yard. On April 8th, 2021, the applicant submitted for a building permit to construct an addition to the second living quarters attached to the existing accessory building and construct an 80 by 120 riding arena and a 26 by 38 pole barn, both located in the front yard. The planning and building departments advised the applicant a second living quarters would not be permitted use, and the proposed location of the riding arena and pole barn would be considered a front yard, and a permit could not be obtained without first seeking a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals. There are actually three separate requests. The first request, the applicant is seeking a variance to construct an 80 by 120 riding arena to be located within the front yard in the front of the existing accessory building. Per section 419.03, accessory buildings shall not be erected in any minimum side yard setback nor in any front yard pursuant to the proposed riding arena is located approximately 142 feet back from the road and 575 feet in front of the front existing dwelling. The applicant is seeking to construct a riding arena as the intent is to have a public stable. Per section 400.903.3, principal uses permitted subject to special approval, a public stable involving more commercial or public activity than boarding of horses, not owned by a person living on the lot or premises where the public stable is located, requires a full site plan and special approval process, thus requiring a variance to allow a riding arena to be constructed in the front yard to determine the location prior to moving forward through the site plan and special approval process. The applicant has stated the proposed arena area is due to the fact the existing home is a good distance back in the front of the property where the existing accessory building is located and has been utilized for boarding of horses for at least 60 years. The applicant has variance 2. The applicant has indicated in the submitted letter, one of the main reasons when purchasing the home in November of 2020 was due to an attached living quarters to the existing accessory building and it being able to serve as a living quarters for her aging mother. The applicant noted she was informed that the living quarters had tenants for at least the past 30 years. As a separate secondary living quarter would not be permitted on one parcel, the planning department proceeded with further research of the property and was able to obtain further information. While there were no findings of any permits or a certificate of occupancy for the second living quarters, in speaking with the assessing department, it was verified the property is being assessed for 2 residential buildings and sketched on the assessing record card as an apartment. Information from the minutes from both dates and the assessing card were provided. Thus, the variance to allow an existing second living quarters attached to the existing accessory building to serve as a secondary living quarters on one parcel. The third variance, the applicant is seeking a variance to construct a 26 by 38 pole barn to be located within the front yard. Per section 400.1903, accessory buildings shall not be erected in any minimum side yard nor in any front yard pursuant to the schedule of regulations. The proposed pole barn will be located in front of the existing dwelling, approximately 750 feet from the road and 57 feet in front of the existing dwelling. The applicant has stated the proposed structure will provide an area for her husband to store his tools, provide an area for his hobby of restoring vehicles and lawn care. I also included from the building department, when the home was constructed, the health department showing where the well and septic location was located in proximity to the home and the proposed location of the accessory building. The applicant has supplied 2 letters of no objection to the request, including support to allow the existing secondary living quarters to remain from neighboring properties. Should the variance request be granted, the variances required are variance to construct an 80 by 120 riding arena to be located in the front yard, a variance to construct a 26 by 38 accessory building to be located in the front yard, and a variance to permit a 1-family dwelling quarters attached to the existing accessory building to continue to serve as a secondary living quarters on 1 parcel.
Thank you, Ms. Rector. Is the applicant or applicants on the phone right now, Mr. and Mrs. Schwarzinski?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we are.
Great. Is there anything you'd like to add to what Ms. Rector had just stated?
Nope, that sounds all about right.
Okay, great. We do have an open public hearing right now, so I'll entertain if there are any folks on the phone that'd like to make comments about the variance request for the property at 4173 West Rock Road. Please state your name and address for the record and make your comment. Okay, we'll give it a few more minutes and then I'll look for a motion to close the public hearing. Until then, I'll open it up for comment and questions from the board. I'll start with a question. I guess this is more of a question just for clarification from Dennis maybe. Since this is zoned ag or agricultural, there's plenty of acreage. I'm under a safe assumption that size here does not matter. The fact that it's a 120 by 80 foot riding facility and a 26 by 38 accessory building, that has no bearing here. It's just because it's the front yard essentially.
Correct. It's just that it's a front yard. I think they both meet all the main setbacks, even for a main building. So they're
Okay.
100 feet away from the front property line. So, correct. It's just that it's in the front yard.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kohler. And secondary question for Ms. Rector, and how many feet off of the street from the front property line was the house? I think you stated that.
I think the riding arena was going to be almost like 575 feet from the house, something like that.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if there's something that shows exactly, I don't think I have exactly how far the home was back.
Mr. Chair, I Google images here. It's looking about 800 and something feet from the closest corner of the house.
Okay.
And if you look at the minutes from the BZA meeting, the home was built in the back because there is a shared pond, looking at the aerial of it.
Right. It looks like the pond takes about half of the backyard, if you call it that, or the side yard. And if I'm looking at the property correctly, it didn't look like there was much of a backyard comparatively speaking to where the house was versus what was the front yard or what's called the front yard. It's a big property, so it'd be a lot of grass to cut if it was a real front yard like I have. But I think my point being here is, you know, if the applicant were to build these 2 facilities in the backyard, I don't know that they'd have appropriate space to be able to go do it with the pond, where the pond is located and where the house is located, in addition to having to build the infrastructure to even access those facilities way in the back of their property. So that's part of the case I'm going to start trying to make for the practical difficulty here.
You could add on that the septic field is behind the house. You couldn't build over top of that either.
Correct. Good point, Mr. Anger.
I don't think you'd want to construct a driveway behind it, around the house, or you definitely wouldn't want to put your driveway in front of your house, blocking the view of the pond. So it definitely makes sense where the pole barn, in garage.
Question for Mr. and Mrs. Straczynski. The riding arena, if I read it correctly, is that going to be attached to the existing accessory building?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it should be like, the way it's set up, there'd be like a 6-foot like walkway in between the two, like fully closed walkway. So yeah, it'd be attached.
Okay. Is the intent to be able to bring the horses from the stable over into the riding area without, being undercover or not having to touch rein, etc.?
Yeah, essentially it's for winter riding, so it's to be enclosed for the wintertime riding.
Okay. Ms. Rector?
I just wanted a quick reminder that the public hearing was still open.
Thank you. I'll pause there and see if there are anybody on the phone that would like to make a public comment about the property on 4173 West Rock Road. All right, then I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I think the motion to close the public hearing.
I'll support that.
All in favor, please state aye.
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 All right, we have none opposed. The public hearing is closed. Thank you for the reminder, Ms. Rector. Any other questions, comments?
So,
Wondering
when do we
if
find out if it's approved or disapproved, not approved?
we're still deliberating on questions and comments. Stay tuned. You'll definitely know when that is. Well, we might have some more questions for you though.
Okay.
Wondering what the thoughts of the group is about the living quarters attached to the existing accessory building.
I guess this is probably more so directed at Mr. Kohler. Should a variance be granted for this dwelling, I would be under the impression that there would be some sort of inspection process and review of that to actually issue a certificate of occupancy.
It's kind of hard to write a C of O without really seeing what's in behind all the walls and the construction of it. But I could do a field inspection to see if it's safe and has proper egress windows in the bedrooms and smoke detectors and things of that nature. It looks kind of rough just when you walk around it right now. So I don't know when there's people living in it last.
There was people living in it. We bought the property. The guy actually moved out 30 days after we bought the property. Our plan is, if you allow us for her to live there, we were going to fully renovate it, update all the electrical, plumbing, and all that. So it would be fully gutted, so you could, see the electrical, plumbing, and all that, and make sure it's all right.
I guess the only potential, Mr. Kohler will be the one that dives into is any foundation issues or any other issues that need to be addressed. But no, that if you plan on fully renovating and going through the permit process, then that's definitely helpful in this respect.
Yeah, the plan was to redo it 100%, all new windows, doors, furnace, then all plumbing and all electrical be updated.
So if I'm thinking about practical difficulties here, I think the location of where the home is on the property, and to Mr. Anger's point, where the septic field is definitely a practical difficulty for being able to construct these two facilities on the property. As far as the practical difficulty, I'm thinking around the living quarters is the fact that it's been there maintained as a living quarters for quite some time now. To not allow it to be continue as a living quarters seems a bit of a disservice to the property. And also I'm thinking about long-term maintenance if it were not a dwelling.
I guess one question I have in regards to living quarters would be well and septic. Is there a separate well and septic system for that home?
The
Quarters?
wells are tied together, and it has its own separate septic.
Okay.
So one well, two septic.
Thank you.
I think everything proposed actually just adds value to the land. It doesn't, the neighbors, I think, will enjoy the added value to the property and not putting it back in the view of their house.
If there are no further questions or comments, I'm willing to entertain a motion if somebody's prepared.
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that property number 5802-006-01220, otherwise known as 4173 West Route Road, have a variance to construct an 80 by 20 riding arena to be located in the front yard, a variance to construct a 26 by 38 accessory building to be located in the front yard, and a variance to prevent a one-family dwelling quarters attached to an existing accessory building to continue to serve as a secondary living quarters on one parcel. Some practical difficulties including the location of the pond, the house, the septic, the well, the current use of the living quarters, and including the no objections from the neighbors as well.
We have a motion. Are there any friendly amendments or support?
To add a couple amendments to that. One would be, this is contingent on the secondary living quarters going through the proper inspection and permit process to obtain a certificate of occupancy, renovated or not. The property owners do intend to renovate it, so that would be a part of that process. But just to be certain that that certificate is obtained. And the only other that I would like to add to that is also contingent on the well and septic of that secondary dwelling being reviewed and approved by the Monroe County Health Department. Just to make sure there's no issues with the shared well and make sure that the septic tank is up to par in case it was not being maintained over the past.
I agree with those amendments.
We have a motion and we have support. Ms. Rector, if you would please call the roll.
Mr. Anger,
Yes.
Mr. Dersch,
Aye.
Mr. Gore,
Aye.
Mr. Wilson. I'm sorry, you're muted.
Yes. Aye.
And Mr. Lake.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Schwarzinski. We move on to the next item, and the next item is the appeal of Mr. Hartford for property at 1737 Center Drive in Temperance, Michigan, requesting a 2-foot variance distance between adjoining property lines to install an above-ground pool. Let's see, do we have a motion to open the public hearing?
I'll go ahead and make a motion to open the public hearing at 1737 Center Drive.
Do we have support?
I'd support that.
All in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Mr. Gore, you're on mute there.
Yeah, aye.
Open the public hearing. Mr. If you would mind providing a summary.
Yes, again, the applicants are Jordan Hartford and Krista Carter, 1737 Center, approximately 0.36 acres, R2A, single-family residential. Parcel number 58510. The applicant is seeking a 2-foot separation setback variance between adjoining property lines to install an above-ground pool. Per section 400.4017B, there shall be a minimum distance of not less than 10 feet between adjoining property lines or the alley right-of-way of the outside of the swimming pool wall. The proposed location of the pool is 8 feet from the adjoining property line to the south, thus requiring the 2-foot separation setback variance to the adjoining property. The applicant has stated in the supporting letter a hardship due to the depth of the property and the existing structure locations. He has a very limited area to install the pool. The applicant has provided a letter of no objections signed by the neighboring property to the west as well as the neighboring property to the south. At this time, no letter or calls of objection have been received. Should the variance request be granted, the variance required is a 2-foot separation setback variance from the adjoining property.
Thank you, Ms. Rector. Is there anyone or the applicants on the phone?
Yeah.
Mr. Hartford? Thank you. Is there anything else you guys would like to add to what Ms. Rector had already stated?
No, just that our practical difficulty is that we have a narrow yard, and that's like literally the only spot that we're able to put it.
Okay, thank you. All right, this is a public hearing, so I'll check and see if there's anyone who would like to make a comment on 1737 Center Drive. Thank you. Hello, caller. Are you here to make a comment on the variance request for 1737 Center Drive?
No, I'm calling in on the Mulch King,
Okay.
which is
I'd say give us about 10 more minutes for that one, okay?
call back then.
Yes, please do.
Okay, we'll do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Seeing that we have no comment, I'll look for a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll move to close the public hearing.
Support.
All in favor, please state aye.
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 Any questions or comments for the applicant? Ms. Rector, yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch who supported that.
I believe that was Mr. Anger.
Or was it Kyle? I'm sorry, I didn't know if it was Kyle. Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I'll tell Russell for it.
All right. Mr. Gore.
So my question is, I know we have an 8-foot setback for a 24-foot above ground pool, or there should be a 10-foot setback. Is there going to be any type of deck put around that pool? And if that deck does go around the side where their 8-foot setback is, that's even going to make that setback less?
Well, the way we're planning on building our deck, we're not going to build on that side. It's going to be on the deck will be on the east side of the pool, because we have a small deck on the house now. We're just going to extend it. It'll be only on the east side of the pool.
Maybe that's a question also for Mr. Kohler. I mean, if they were to build, say somebody else buys the house and they were to build a deck on the back side of the pool near the property with where the variance request is that a problem, or is it does the setback need to be between the pool, or is it whatever's attached to the pool and the property line?
I usually let the deck be 5 feet from the property line, so they could do a 3-foot deck on that side. Because that's what accessory building setbacks are for a building, an accessory building.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler.
Mr. Chair, question for the applicant. It looks like the property behind them is all one parcel. Have they spoken to that property owner, and did they have any objections? I'd assume probably not, because it looks like they don't have anything in that part of their property, but just wanted to know if they did speak to them.
Yeah, to her. She's one of the ones that signed saying that she approved of it.
Thank you, Mr. Hartford. The other question I have is obviously I got to ask the obvious. Pool size being 24 inch above or 24 foot above ground pool. I'm not sure what a standard size is for an above ground pool of 24, 22, etc. But was there any consideration to having a smaller pool so that the variance wouldn't be needed?
Yeah, actually, we've looked around and the pools are like, they're all sold out. And we're planning on getting the 27, and we downgraded to the 24 because that was the smallest one that we could find.
Mr. Gore, you have a question?
As far as permanent pool outside of like the kiddie type pools.
Okay.
In my experience, 24-foot pool is on the lower average size. Like a 20, you can go 21, but they are pretty small.
Okay.
That was going to be my comment. 24 is small. I had a 24. I upgraded to a 33. And that's plenty big. But when we had a 24, just for a couple of the kids to be in there, it was kind of tight when they start splashing around.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
That was kind of my experience also. I've looked into it a bit, and I would assume then too, if you're going to keep it long term, replacement of a liner or things like that are probably more plentiful. It's not an oddball size. I think a 24 is a very standard, right, on the smaller end. So it probably longer term would be easier to maintain or replace or repair parts and things like that.
Right. Yeah, that's why I see 24 is pretty standard. As far as the smaller ones, I see 20, 30.
Mr. Board?
Yeah, one more quick question. If we grant the variance, is that locked in? Let's say the property owner now that is okay with it sells, and a new property owner comes in and says, hey, I don't like that. I want the setback enforced. Or if we grant the variance, it's locked in, it's good.
For the life of this pool, it would stand in good stead.
Okay.
As long as they maintain the pool, they would have this variance.
Yeah, I guess one option in that with respect would be they could put up a fence, but I guess in terms of practical difficulty, it looks like the corner lots on Jackman and those first two lots really extend back into what would be the backyard of this lot. I think it's just based on how the lots were cut, this house has probably one of the smallest backyards of all the lots on the street.
Yeah, that was another good point there. Look at the lot. It does seem that there's not much room between the back of the house and the back of the property. I don't know if there's any, Mr. Kohler, you've probably seen your fair share of lot sizes. Is this more of an unusual lot size?
This is very small, correct. The minimum is 35 feet, and he's just a couple feet over that. So he's right at the bare minimum for our setback standards requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler. We've got some practical difficulties there. I think we've got some support. Is there anyone willing to make a motion?
I can go ahead and do that. Just give me 1 second. All right, I'll go ahead and make a motion in support of the plus or minus 2 foot separation setback variance for the subject parcel at 1737 Center Road for the construction of an above ground swimming pool. Practical difficulty really, in my eyes, is just the unique size of the lot. It is one of the smallest lots on that street, backyard in that respect. And they did speak to the adjacent property owner, and they are okay with decreasing that setback, and it is minimal at best, with being only 2 foot.
We have a motion. Do we have support or a friendly amendment?
I'll support.
All right. Ms. Director, if you'd call the roll, please.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Mr. Anger?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Gore?
Aye.
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Good luck, Mr. Hartford, with your pool.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. And that is the appeal of Mr. Nish, Mulch King at 2124 Rood Street, Toledo, requesting a variance of the requirement of the perimeter of the entire site utilized for composting operations to be screened and buffered by means of plantings, and a variance of the requirement of the perimeter of the entire site shall be fenced. So what I will do now is see if there is a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing.
Do I hear support? Oh, sorry, Mr. Anger. All in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
None opposed. The public hearing is open. Ms. Rector, if you would mind providing a summary.
Yes, again, the applicant is Andrew Nitz, 2124 Rood Street, Toledo, Ohio. Property at 110 West Smith Road. Architect James Jacobs Architect. Parcel 5802-035-07500. I-2 light industrially zoned. I'll give you a little just a small portion of the history. Due to the non-compliance with the site plan approval and special approval as granted on September 27, 2017, and the removal of the natural tree buffer to the east along Telegraph Road that was approved in lieu of the ordinance required plantings and fencing, the applicant is submitting an amended site plan to be considered by the Planning Commission. However, additional variances are required prior to action being taken by the Planning Commission. The applicant requested 3 variances on February 1st, 2021, where all 3 variances were denied. And I did include all those minutes that has all the detail of past history on this property as well. The applicant is requesting 2 variances at this time. Variance from 1503.5 BB, which is the perimeter of the entire site utilized for composting operations to be screened and buffered by means of plantings, a double row of evergreens 6 to 8 feet in height at planting with no more than a 15-foot spacing and offset by 8 feet. The applicant is seeking a variance along the west property line where it abuts a residentially RM2 zone property under the same ownership. On September 12, 2017, the BZA suggested the Planning Commission require a screening of a 3-foot berm and a mix of tree line to be installed and meet the height standards of the submitted site plan. The Planning Commission followed the BZA recommendation and approved the site plan containing a tree line 3-foot berm to meet the requirements of the zoning ordinance. The landscaping berm was not installed along the west property line. However, the berm was installed along the south property line, but does not meet the minimum planting requirement. The applicant is requesting an approximately 850-foot variance south of Indian Creek on the west side to remain with the existing heavily wooded area on the property, leaving approximately 100 feet of existing berm to be screened by installing a mixture of evergreen trees and shrubs, and to install a 3-foot berm with a mixture of plantings to continue on the south side and east to the existing remaining wooded area on the eastern side, as where there is currently does not meet the original site plan. The owner, Andrew Nitz, stated that he has had direction from Eagle that stated, Eagle is what was previously MDEQ through the state, that stated they are not permitting to install the berm and screening as they obtained an initial opinion from the NRM and Eagle that tentatively located the wetlands along the property line. And I did submit and provide you with both those letters from the NRM and Eagle, the email from Eagle. The applicant is requesting the board to take into consideration the previously portion of the motion from February 1st of 2021, where the request was denied. However, it was granted to exclude those areas on the north and east side of the property where the heavily wooded tree line was not removed. And I did provide those and highlight that area for you. Variance 2. Authorized dumping during non-business hours. The perimeter of the entire site shall be fenced. The fence shall be a minimum of 6 feet in height and not to exceed a maximum as set by the Planning Commission in connection with the site plan review. The fencing required in this section that is contiguous to a residential zoning district and or an agricultural zoning district used residentially shall be a solid vinyl coated decorative fence or equivalent. Such fence shall be placed behind the buffer area according by ordinance. Access points to the site shall be controlled by locked gates to prevent unauthorized entrance. The use of a barbed wire, razor, or electrified fencing shall be prohibited. At this time, the applicant is requesting a renewed variance as submitted on the originally approved site plan to allow the proposed 3-foot berm and a mix of planting barriers as submitted if that variance should be granted tonight, and the existing roadside ditch and depth of the right-of-way to provide a natural buffer to prevent unauthorized access and dumping to serve as the requirement in place of the minimum of the 6-foot in height fencing of the entire perimeter of the site by ordinance. The submitted James S. Jacobs Architect's letter clearly identifies the variances that are being sought at this time, states the requirements of the ordinance, and provides a detail of what the applicant is seeking. Once the applicant has completed the variance process, the applicant will again be required to go through the site plan approval process for the amended site plan. No public hearing will be required as the special approval is still valid. The planning department is strongly encouraging you to visit the site prior to this meeting. Should you have any further questions, please contact the planning department. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rector. Is there the applicant or a representative of the applicant on the phone?
Good evening, Chairman. This is Jim Jacobs with Jacobs Architects. I'm here, as well as the other number ending in 1973. That's the owner, Andrew Nitz.
I'm here as well.
Both here to answer any questions. I think what was presented by Ms. Rector is pretty spot on. So I don't want to belabor the issue, but just add, I guess, a point of clarity that previously we were requesting no screening along that southerly and easterly edge. What we're coming back with this evening in the request of a variance is to suggest an alternate style of screening that was previously approved at the entranceway along the southern property line for the south and east edges. So we're asking for that variance to have an alternate style of screening method there with a 3-foot berm and trees. And then carrying that same thought process approximately 100 feet down the westerly line, and then due to the hardship of the apparent wetlands, ask for a waiver of screening from that point to the woods at the southern edge.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. With that said, we are open for public comment. If there's anyone on the phone that would like to make a comment about the appeal of Mulch King, please state your name and address for the record. George, do we have a caller? Sure. We are open for public comment on the appeal of Mulch King. If your caller is on, please state your name and address for the record and make your comment, please.
Tim Churchill, actually appearing on behalf of the applicant, attorney in Temperance.
Is there any comments you'd like to make, Mr. Churchill?
I guess not at this time. I think Mr. Jacobs has it under control there.
Great. All right. If people are not speaking at this time, if you don't mind going on mute so we don't hear background, that'd be great.
Okay, certainly will do. Okay.
All right. If we have another caller on that would like to make a comment about the appeal of Mulch King, please state your name and address for the record and make your comment.
I guess I would like to make a comment at the end regardless myself, so.
Sure, not a problem, Mr. Churchill. Do we have any other callers on?
Can we just go ahead and talk?
Yes, go ahead. Just state your name and address for the record and make your comment, please.
Well, my name is Mike Cott, and my address is 6505 West Bancroft. I'm actually in Toledo. I have some property up there in Bedford Township. I think what Mr. Nitz is doing over there is a great service for the citizens of the township. Kind of wish I could have listened to the rest of the meeting to hear what was all talked about, but I think what he's doing there is a great service for the citizens.
Not a problem. You haven't missed the meeting just yet, so stay tuned.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any other callers? I don't believe we do. If you're not speaking at this moment, if you would please go on mute. All right. I'll leave it open just in case some other callers call in. So we're still in public hearing mode. Mr. Rector, give me a reminder if I go too long under public hearing. So I'll open it up to the board for any questions or comments to start the conversation. Mr. Gore?
Thank you. Okay, as everybody knows, I've been have had several meetings with Mr. Nitz and Mr. Jacobs, myself and Mr. Steiner, Mr. Jacob, and Andrew. We met out at Mulch King for about an hour last month, and it was a very productive meeting. We got to walk the property, we had a map, and we got some additional information that we did request. I'll start out with the west side. We did ask for information from Eagle or DEQ about wetlands over there, and I'm sure everybody has gotten the emails that Ms. Rector forwarded from Mr. Nish, stating that there are regulated wetlands on his parcels, and from the Natural Resource Management that also stated that they have concerns that an earthen berm would likely impact the wetlands. So I don't see an issue. I guess I don't believe there needs to be a variance, or is it just a dead issue that it's wetlands? He really can't do anything, I don't believe, without a permit from Eagle. If I'm misspeaking, please, Ms. Rector, stop me and let me know. And there has already been a variance granted for a 3-foot berm on the south side of the property, Smith Road property. And I guess they're just is requesting a continuance to go along. Trees were cut down. Unfortunately, they were cut down and butting up with the tree line that's already there. So that's where I'm at. The property, like I said, we went over it. He said he can get it done. He can get the 3-foot berm done. And I guess on the, no, I'm trying to get my bearing straight here, so I'm talking direct. So the north, I guess, east side where there's already a wooded area, that would be considered the natural buffer. And as long as those woods stay intact, there wouldn't need to be any type of a buffer over there. So that's the information that I've had at this time, just looking at my notes.
Thank you, Mr. Gore. Ms. Rector?
Yeah, I would refer to Phil on the comments regarding whether a variance would be required still on that, because the wooded area and that portion on the west side being under the jurisdiction of the state, I would refer to Phil if there would still be required a variance. And I believe on the south side with the berm, the reason he has to seek another variance on that is because the berm was never installed as approved on the site plan. But I will let Phil direct on that as our counsel.
So I still believe you need a variance, but the practical difficulty is obvious, and that's the existence of the wetlands as determined by the survey conducted of the site and the opinion issued by Eagle. So a variance is still necessary, but if you're inclined to grant variance, the practical difficulty would be the existence of the wetlands.
Thank you, Mr. Goldsmith. I have a question. The tree line on the west side of the property, I know there was a tree line there originally because that was the variance request. When were those trees removed?
I think that's the east side of the property.
I was referring to the west side. Wasn't there a tree line there as well at some point?
No, the lot was open to the property line on the west side. Those trees that are on the west side of the line are on an adjacent parcel for the most part. They may bleed over a little bit on the line there, but for the most part, they were existing on the west side, which is now owned by Mr. Nish.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, Jake, if I could say, the trees on the west side have never been removed. There's two parcels, I own both. The 7.4 acre zoned residential one is about 20-foot buffer from the 16.5 acre one that the Mulch King is currently on. I left that buffer there between the two properties because I was going to build my own house back in there and wanted it screened from my business or work already anyway. So there's a 20-foot buffer irregardless that exists, which most of that goes up into the wetland areas as it goes to the north, which I wanted to leave for that entire purpose.
Gotcha. Thanks for the clarity. Ms. Rector, I believe you had a question.
I just wanted to remind you that the public hearing was still open and it's been about 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Wellinger, so I think, great, okay. So I think I'll make or I would like for someone to make a motion when we close public hearing.
I'll go ahead and make a motion.
Oh, go ahead, Kyle.
I can support.
I'll make a motion to close public hearing.
Let's support that.
All right, all in favor, please state aye.
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 All right, public hearing is now closed. Thank you. All right, thanks for the reminder, Ms. Rector. All right, any other questions or discussion, especially while we have the applicant and Mr. Jacobs on the phone?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just have, I guess, one comment and one other question here. I guess the screening was previously approved on the south side, and it's my understanding that it wasn't installed as approved. Is there a reason that it was not installed the way that it was approved with the site plan? I guess this is directed at the applicant or his counsel.
Yeah, no, I can answer that question. So originally that property was going to be developed by a company called Dundee Manufacturing before I purchased it. We used their survey that was done when we purchased the property. And so when we ended up going to do the actual construction, approved, I guess, landscaping or berm was 3 foot by 20 foot. And when we went to actually look at the survey, it was done incorrectly. And it was over almost 3 feet off. So when we put it in and then we went to put the entrance in, the entrance ended up being 3 feet higher so that it was graded properly to flow. Like you can't flood out Smith Road, right? So when we put that entrance in, the concrete entrance is there now. We had already done the landscaping. So it looks like it's not a 3 foot high berm because we ended up taking the grade down almost 3 feet. So it wasn't that we did it unintentional or we're trying to get around anybody. It just turned out to be that the information that was given to them or provided to them, the individual who did it did not do it correctly. So that's why it's still a berm that's there and the landscaping's there, and I think it looks nice. There's bushes, flowers, river rock, everything on both sides of the entrance. It's just we ended up having to build the entrance 3 feet higher than we ever thought we were going to begin with.
Thank you for that. And then the second question I had is really, and I think Jake will agree with me, is looking for the practical difficulty regarding the fencing. I know this came up before as a variance in the past, I think a couple times now. This is probably the third time it's come up. Just looking for some more insight on that and kind of what your thoughts are regarding that.
I'll jump in on this one first here, and then if you want to add anything, Andrew, go ahead. But I think what we're looking for is an alternate style of screening, not necessarily the absence of screening. If we're talking about the south and east line, So we're proposing is a little softer approach than a solid vinyl style fence that the ordinance suggests. So we're asking for a variance, I guess, in the type of screen. We understand that in this case, the Planning Commission can't alter or consider accepting that alternate style of screening. So we were directed to come back to the BZA to obtain that kind of an approval for that piece of it. So as far as a practical difficulty, I think it's one that's we feel is more practical and a softer approach from the township's standpoint for that corner to have more of a landscape style buffer as opposed to the hard line created by a vinyl fence.
Yeah, and I would agree, but it would also be attractiveness wise. It would the woods to the northeast, the north, and the west that are there now, the tree line that is there, are either all the way into what would be the 100-year floodplain or a wetland. So we're not going anywhere in those directions, which is what we discussed, years ago when the first variance on the white vinyl fence was granted. And I think a landscaping berm with just like what's on the both sides of the entrance now would be way more attractive, and we could still make it, the 3 foot high with all the bushes and stuff on it, then versus putting a 300-foot long white vinyl fence. Or it would, I think, personally wise, it would look way better versus a screening of a white vinyl fence as well. So that's why we're proposing something that would be more attractive, but still serve the purpose of being a screening.
Mr. Anger?
Do you consider the dead logs surrounding it part of the landscaping, or is that just?
No, those would be gone. We only put those there originally before we even went that direction. We put those all out there because, again, we didn't want anybody coming and going or doing what they like. They could drop off stuff if no one was there. So
that's good.
Those would all be removed.
Those
are all going to be removed. Yeah.
Just a question, maybe Jody, you can help me here from an ordinance perspective. I think we're talking about two different things, right? The berms and the screening being the evergreens would be considered the screening. The fencing was really more of a security measure to keep people out of the property during off hours. So are we, okay, so we're talking about two different things. So I think, as far as like attractiveness and aesthetics, I understand that. I completely get it. I think, the plantings and whatnot, the berms make sense. But the security aspect, I think, is the bigger question, right? So how do you keep people out off hours? Would the screening that's put in place be close enough together so people wouldn't be able to, potentially drive a vehicle between them? I'm just trying to understand, how we achieve the security aspects of the property without an appropriate fence or some other alternative like a large tree line to keep people out.
So in the original request back at the time of approval, that was discussed in the eastern and southern corner, along with the remaining woodlots to the north and rest of the east line that still are there, were felt to be an appropriate barrier to allow for the access protection that the fence was seeking to guard against. So, and the trees became removed from the corner. We're feeling that the same measure of protection would be in place with this new berm and new landscaping with the same logic that was used in the original variance approval for that that portion of the southern, on either side of the entrance up to the point where the previous woods used to be.
Okay, so the idea is then that the berm and the screening would in fact act as the fence essentially.
Correct.
Yeah, that.
Preventing
and if I could
illegal and unauthorized dumping, which is what the ordinance indicates it's protecting against. At any point in the property, even with a fence, I suppose, someone could walk into the site, which there's not much to steal here, so the owner wasn't concerned about a security level of fencing as much as protecting against what the ordinance was concerned about too, which was the unofficial dumping on the site and vehicular access.
Yeah, and the ditch, there's a ditch that runs all the way to Smith, so it's only a couple 100 feet on Telegraph where there's not a ditch, that the berm and all the bushes and trees and everything else that we're proposing would prevent people. I can't imagine somebody would want to drive over a bush in between a bunch of trees to drop off a bag of leaves along Telegraph Road. So I can't believe they would want to go through the ditch or anything either on Smith. So I would think it would serve the same purpose. But again, that's your discretion.
No, I would agree with you on the ditch. I don't think anyone's going to take the risk of potentially, damaging their vehicle, getting caught, so to speak. I think I'm just trying to separate the two conversations between screening and fencing, understand the aesthetics piece that you're trying to achieve, and I can appreciate that. Mr. Anker?
It's been a while since I was originally part of the approval of the Mulch King. And I'm trying to recall back, and I think it was kind of a dual purpose thing, kind of like it would be act as security, and it would kind of act as a landscaping barrier from the road to not see a bunch of piles of. So I think it was, but I mean, you're still going to see it because it's quite tall. But I think it was dual purpose, if I can recall, but I can't say 100% on that.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Gore?
I guess, if I understand correctly, when the original site plan was done, a variance was granted on the south side for a 3-foot berm, but it was never put in place. Is that my understanding?
That is correct. It should have been installed, the 3-foot berm from grade. And I understand that Mr. Nitz is explaining that when they then put in the approach, that's where the confusion came in on the grade. So the plantings look like they're probably only a foot tall, but they might have been 3 foot from the grade at the time. But the site still has to come into compliance with the approved site plan of the 3-foot berm.
Correct. Yes.
Yes.
And Mr. Goldsmith, if any of these variances are granted, we can put steps on them, correct? Time frames, things like that, or something to that nature.
Yes, the granting of a variance can be accompanied by conditions. You have the statutory authority to do that, and also you have the authority to recommend to the Planning Commission in implementing the site plan things be done. So the answer to your question is yes, absolutely, you can do that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Wilson had his hand up first.
Yeah, just two, I guess, one point of clarification or a request for clarification, and then just a quick question regarding, I guess, on to Mr. Gore's comment. So just to confirm, even though I'm just looking at the documentation, and that the variance that was approved on the south side for that berm and the tree line, just to confirm, that's what's being proposed on that, what would that be, southwest corner in the pink, if I'm looking at the packet. And it would be the same berm and same type of tree line going all the way across the south and up the east, right? I mean, that would be the expectation is the same 3 feet and the same type of plantings.
So if you, in your packet, if you look at sheet L1, that probably describes it the best.
Okay.
And yes, it would be consistent with the original variance along the southern line. We would 100 feet roughly the westerly line, and then extend it from its previous point of approval all the way along the south and east edges till it meets the remaining wood lot.
Okay. And then the other, I thought it was a good point with it that Mr. Gore brought up in terms of the timing. If these variances were to be approved, or whichever ones may be approved, does it make sense potentially to in the approval to note something that to be in agreement, or to have a time frame, stipulated based on the Planning Commission's guidance? I mean, I don't know. Myself personally, I don't necessarily know what time would be reasonable to install this type of berm and all the plantings. I don't know if the Planning Commission maybe has more expertise in that area.
Let me jump in if I may. Our planning director had her hand up, and I think she can comment on some of what's just been discussed. If that's with your permission, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. If Ms. Rector would like to clarify, that'd be great.
I didn't know if Mr. Goldsmith wanted to speak first. I was just going to say,
go ahead, Jody.
okay, I was just going to say the west side property, Jeff, where there is noted that they're going to use what is existing on the berm. Mm-hmm. I don't know clearly how tall that is on that westerly side. Maybe Mr. Jacobs or Mr. Nitz can verify, but I believe they're not going to increase that berm. I believe they're going to use what is existing and then add plantings. And then the 3-foot berm will continue on the south side of the property to the east, 3-foot berm with plantings. But I believe the existing berm that is there is going to be on the west side. And I believe that with the Planning Commission, the landscaping, should the variances be granted, I believe, and Mr. Goldsmith may correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe with the site plan moving forward, I believe that the landscaping could begin to be installed because the variance, should it be granted, can move forward because the site plan is going to go into compliance with what the variances are that are granted.
So to answer your question, Jody, the berm itself right now is needs to be verified again in the field, but from our observation on the field, from grade in that location, it was 3 feet tall. It does need to be top dressed, so there's going to be some improvement to the existing berm along that westerly edge, and then the new plantings added to it. But that was going to be the basis to start with, but in the end, it should all be uniform.
So to piggyback on what's been commented upon, and maybe to address Mr. Wilson's questions or statements, if the Board of Zoning Appeals grants variances, that's, as I view it, that is step one, as Jody mentioned. Step two is a review by the Planning Commission, because the Planning Commission really controls site plan approval. So with the granting of the variances, and Jody, correct me, I don't know if it needs to go back to the Planning Commission, and maybe even Jim Jacobs knows this from his work with the Planning Commission and to our planning department. Do we have to verify plantings, number of plantings, height of plantings, things of that nature, if this board allows the 3-foot berm with plantings to substitute for a solid or vinyl fence? maybe those are more questions than answers, but I want to make sure we get it right in terms of not stepping on the planning commission's toes, because they control site plan review and site plan approval. We control, this board controls variances from the ordinance. So again, if you grant the variance and allow what I'll call a substitution and what Jim Jacobs called a softening of the site plan to allow for the berm and plantings as opposed to a fence, then I want to make sure we get it right and do what the planning commission wants in terms of, again, number of plantings, size of plantings, things of that nature.
Yes, so to piggyback on that, and maybe Jody wants to weigh in on it, but my understanding is there's issues related to some differences in the actual use of the site that require some amendment to the special use approval outside of the variance need. So either way, we have to go back to the planning commission for a modification to the site plan, as I understand it. And before we could go there, these variances needed to be sought and answered to address that amended site plan. Now, whether the work can begin on this portion of it after tonight's approval, should it be granted, before that site plan amendment is made, that's a staffing question. My understanding is that we would be going through each step of approval first, and then once it's all approved, Mr. Nitz would have a time period to execute the amended site plan with this variance in place, if offered.
And I will just add, I guess clarification maybe from Phil is the variance is actually seeking the operations, and it actually lists a row of evergreens 6 to 8 feet in height at planting and no more than 15-foot spacing and offset by 8 feet. I believe the Board of Zoning Appeals would have to grant the variance should they desire to, with that in mind, that would be what would, even though they're plantings, they're going to still install, they're not going to be evergreens 6 to 8 feet in height and not 15 feet in spacing, no more than 8 feet. So I don't know if that's where the variances are being sought on the actual perimeter of the site with landscaping, and then that serving for the fencing, because it's not going to be 6 feet in height evergreens. They're proposing just different types of plantings and shrubbery.
No, there's evergreens mixed in there.
But I don't believe that the
there's that.
spacing. I just that's the request though from the variance. The variance actually specifies what types of plantings and the spacing between them. So I would assume that once that decision is made tonight, I agree with Mr. Jacobs. The plan would have to be amended, go back to planning, and then after that step is taken care of, then move forward with amending the site to meet the site plan.
I agree with that.
But I would say too, you guys, that because it's not pine trees or evergreen trees, what we're proposing, we've actually included more and closer together because we're proposing flowering trees and shrubs. I actually called Michigan State University and had them give me ones that are drought tolerant that we included because we don't have water access there, but we made them closer than a pine tree or a spruce tree every 8 or 15 feet apart. So I think what Jody is saying is she's saying they're not going to be as close together. There's actually going to be way more than if we just did the other route.
I think it's a safe bet to have it go to before the planning so they can take a close look at the plantings, and that way it's more thoroughly looked at as far as that part goes.
I would just suggest for clarification, if that's the board's desire to make, include that in the motion, to have the planning commission review the proposed plantings in the motion then.
So I didn't really read that in the information, and maybe I missed it, but essentially in the ordinance, it is written that the screening is required to be evergreens. I did realize that, but the current, or I guess there isn't a plan yet, right? It depends upon the variances we might grant here tonight. It doesn't state what those plantings are that will be on the berm at this point. So that is unknown at this point, other than just what was stated.
Well, they have them listed on the landscape scheduling of what on the second page, types of plantings to serve. They have it listed. I know it's difficult to see on the size of the plan you have, but they have identified as submitted, and I believe that what you're seeing is, and Mr. Jacobs can probably, the plan for the plantings that you have presented is what they're going to propose to the Planning Commission as well.
That's correct. So I now discovered where you're getting that from, Jody, and it's in the first paragraph of my variance request, where I stated that the double row of evergreens, 6 to 8 foot in height at planting, and describe their spacing there. But then in the subsequent paragraphs is where it indicates the mix of the 3 foot berm with those evergreens and the shrubbery planted between them. And then the landscape plan that was submitted is the roadmap, if you will, of how that looks. So the specific plantings and the type of trees, their spacing and their size are outlined on sheets L1 and L2. And if it's more appropriate for the Planning Commission to determine the density of that, then I would think that, you know, if so moved, the variance might state that you expect it to be a mix of those with a minimum level, and then let the Planning Commission determine based on review of a full site plan, landscape plan, I should say, that if there's a way to make that the wording, then they can determine the actual configuration of that, or what we're proposing is that L1 and L2 landscape plan. So if it's more appropriate to just approve that as it is, then that would be acceptable too. So whatever method is in the best interest for making sure you get what you want.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments, discussion? So there's really 3 ways we're looking at this, in my opinion. We're talking about the west boundary, where we've got the documentation from Eagle and NRM. We've got the variance request in the east boundary, and then we've also got the variance request for the fencing. So I think if we're going to talk about, you know, motions, we should probably call those 3 items out.
Would it be appropriate to kind of, I don't know, start out with, I guess at least what I see is maybe the clearest of them being the western border, and maybe kind of build up, at least that's the one that I see as maybe the easiest, but it maybe build upon that if other things make sense.
I think that would work. I'm thinking, are you suggesting we would make a motion for each variance request or one motion with all the variance
Yeah,
requests?
I don't know. I guess I suppose maybe it could go either way, but I guess I thought the latter of the two, where we, is to not maybe get things mixed up. Start off with, I was just thinking myself personally that the western side to me makes the most sense. It's fairly clean. It's a known practical difficulty. Almost as if some of these others where there's a friendly amendment, right? Then from there, maybe if the group feels it makes sense, then kind of move on to the second and potentially the third.
I think that might simplify things, but I'm not sure, if that's a possibility. I guess I'll ask Mr. Goldsmith if it's possible, could we have 3 separate motions for these variance requests?
Yes, you can. It might be preferable to proceed in that fashion, attack one at a time, and that way you can pay careful attention to what conditions that you might want to impose.
Thank you, Mr. Goldsmith. So, Mr. Wilson, there you go. If you're prepared for a motion, by all means, I think we're ready to hear one.
Okay. Yeah, I've got some notes here for so I would be prepared to make a motion to approve the variance on the western side of the property at the location 110 West Smith Road, Temperance 48182. It's parcel 58-002-035-075-00, and would approve the request for variance on the western portion of the property to not have to add any berming or additional trees or fencing based on the guidance from both what would be Eagle and let's see, and yeah, I'm just trying to look up both letters. Sorry here. So NRM. And then, what's the second one? Sorry. Trying to find that other letter. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so based on the guidance from what would be Eagle and from NRM, suggesting that the wetlands, can't be, you can't do anything there in the wetlands, and that, further variance or further approval would be required to do anything. So that being the practical difficulty.
A motion to think, I might have a friendly amendment, Mr. Wilson. I think the variance request was for 850 feet. I think there's still going to be 100 foot of berming and screening that they're going to install.
Yeah, I would agree. I didn't know if that would be maybe kind of a second piece, but I would agree with what you're saying. I think I guess to take into account the entire western side, then to allow for the right. So you're saying to potentially then allow for the existing berm on the southernmost portion of the west side to be retained, and then to install those plantings.
Yes, yeah, I think that's what the variance was requesting, right. And then the 850 feet was because of the drainage due to the wetlands. Yep.
Yeah. No, I would agree.
Okay. We have a motion. Do we have support? Looks like Mr. Dersh.
Support. I just want to jump in and I guess kind of ask one question here, or maybe address all the locations of the berm at once under this motion. Because it was approved on the south side already, from my understanding, so we would then extend that southern berm up to where the tree line sits at this point. I think that would be our first variance, and then the second would be the types of plantings, followed by the third with the fence, if the team agrees.
So what you're saying, Mr. Dersh, just to make sure that I'm copying here, is that maybe address the wetland portion first, the berms all together, and then finally the fence is what your thought would be as far as potentially 3 motions.
Correct. I think our first one should be the locations of the berm, and then for the plantings, and then the third would be the fence. So that would amend this to say that the berm as presented on the western side would follow the southern boundary of the property as previously approved, and then towards the east, ending at the current tree line limits for that brush.
Okay. So then,
Everything.
okay. So what you're going back then to Mr. Wilson's motion and just saying basically leave it at the 850 feet due to the wetland concern, and then we'll attack the berm on a separate item. Okay, then I think that makes logic. I will withdraw my amendment then and let Mr. Wilson's motion stand as is. And then Mr. Gore, I think you either had a comment or a question.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of both you and Mr. Dersch with some friendly amendments, but you guys got that cleared up. And then we'll just tackle them as they come.
Okay, so I will withdraw my amendment to Mr. Wilson's motion.
I have one more quick thing for Mr. Goldsmith. Where should we incorporate whatever stipulations about time frames? Because I know it's going to take time, but it's got to go to planning. So I don't want to say, 6 weeks and it can't get it done because of whatever. Where should that come into play about? Where should we do an amendment or a friendly for that?
Well, I think you can, it might be wise to make it part of each of the 3 motions, Joe. Then we have it covered.
Okay.
And I just want to make sure the board is on the same page. Both Kyle and Jeff could restate that initial motion and what exactly it encompasses, so we have a clear record for our recording secretary here. And then add in, Joe, you could add in a friendly amendment if you so desire relative to timing.
I'm going to ask one more question on the timing stipulation, just so I think, Joe, where you're going with that is, what's the appropriate kind of starting point for Mulch King upon approval, right? Is that more or less what you're looking for?
Yeah, because I know right now is probably a super busy time, and I don't want to set anybody up for failure. And granted, I understand from previous is what happened in the past, but we're going to get past that and move forward. So yeah, that's what I was looking for guidance. I mean, I'm open to suggestions. What?
Okay. My thought here, and Mr. Goldsmith or Ms. Rector maybe help me if I'm in the wrong direction here, but I think what Mr. Gore might want to suggest here would be upon the approval of the site plan to be completed upon that point. Are we able to make a time stipulation like that, perhaps?
Yes, you can do that. And you can I think that's a good way to do it, because the Planning Commission has to approve the site plan and the landscape plan. So upon final approval of those plans, then the applicant has X number of days, whatever, in which to complete it, so that we keep the process moving, but within a reasonable time frame as suggested by Mr. Gore.
Okay. Mr. Dersch, you have a question?
I was going to kind of comment to Mr. Gore here on that and just throw out kind of what I think is an appropriate time frame would be, installation of the berm, the earthen berm and mulching, whatever ground cover and stabilization is required within 6 months of approval from the Planning Commission, followed by installation of the plantings within 1 calendar year to allow those to be installed at the most appropriate time for that type of plant. That buys them the fall and the spring window to get those plants installed when it's best for them.
I agree. I was thinking along that lines because there's, again, I'm no master gardener, but there's certain times you plant stuff and certain times you don't plant stuff. So, I mean, we can't say it's got to be all done in 3 months when you can't put certain plants in the ground. Yeah, I would agree with that. Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to rewind us back to Jeff's original motion here. So good comments, good questions. I like the clarity. Thank you very much, everybody, for helping us get this straight. So I guess we'll rewind it back to Mr. Wilson's original motion. And I believe, and Mr. Wilson, correct me if I'm wrong, I'll just reiterate what you had stated, which is essentially going to approve the 850-foot variance on the west boundary due to concerns of wetlands and drainage. No berm can be constructed there without disrupting the drainage.
Correct. Right.
So we have a motion for that portion of all the variance requests. Do we have support?
Support.
All right, Ms. Rector, if you would call the roll, please.
Yes. Mr. Wilson?
Aye.
Mr. Gore?
Aye.
Mr. Dersch?
Aye.
Mr. Anger?
Yes.
Mr. Lake?
Yes.
Motion carried.
There's one motion. All right. Any further discussion on the other two variance requests, or is somebody prepared to make a motion?
Chairman, sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to mention that I thought that it may be ahead of the other two, but I thought that the timing that was thrown out there seemed pretty realistic and pretty reasonable. So maybe that'll be an easy one if we can work through these others. But that seems pretty good in my opinion as well.
So I think we still have the berm and screening to discuss or create a motion, and the fence variance to make a motion for as well.
I'll take a crack at the, oh, go ahead, Kyle.
I was just going to do the same thing. You're more than welcome to if you'd like.
Okay. Phil, would we have to go through and outline the property number and all that again?
No, you can just make reference to the previous same property, same address, and then go with your motion.
Okay. So again, I'm making reference to the same property as the previous motion, and grant the variance, a renewed variance submitted on the original approved site plan to allow the proposed 3-foot berm and mix of planting barrier submitted along the south side, wrapping around to the east to the wooded area in the northeast corner of the property. To provide a natural barrier to prevent unauthorized access and dumping, to serve as the requirement in place of the minimum of a 6-foot high fence of the entire perimeter site by ordinance. I got that somewhat. Is that clear as mud?
Are we missing? Maybe I'm getting all of them confused now. But are we missing the 100-foot of berm on the south side? Or I'm sorry, not south, the west boundary.
I thought we got that on last.
We withdrew that to keep all the berming as one continuous
I can add that in. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ms. Rector.
That's okay. I was just gonna ask if you wanted me to read back what Kyle had stated regarding the berming the first time.
I think that would be helpful. Yes.
Okay. I believe was to not require anything in the 850 feet on the west side, supported with the NRM and the Eagle letter, not requiring mix of plantings or fencing in the 850 feet. And that was the motion that was carried. The information that Kyle spoke on the berm was as presented on the southwesterly side, continuing on the southern property to the west property, or the east property to the existing heavily wooded area, a 3-foot berm as submitted on the landscaping plan provided.
Okay.
Oh, and the earthen berm to be installed within 6 months of the Planning Commission approval following 1 calendar year to install the plantings.
Mr. Gore, would you want to amend with those comments?
Yes, I would. That helps out tremendously.
And then Mr. Dersch, you got your hand raised. Is that for support or?
There's a question with the addition of the fence, being that's a separate variance. Do we need a separate motion to address that piece from the berm?
I would think let's keep the fence for a third motion and keep those all 3 separate just to keep it clear.
Understood. So this specific motion is in reference to the location of the berm and then the construction of it in terms of planting. So I would like to amend that to say, in addition, the Planning Commission will have final approval of the number and types of plantings and the density of the plantings during the review process, but the BZA does not take exception to what they choose.
Mr. Gore, do you accept that amendment?
I accept that amendment.
Then, Ms. Rector, do we want to read it back in its full just to make sure everything's clear?
Sure. To grant the berm as presented on the southwest side, continuing on the southern property line to the east property line to the existing heavily wooded area where the earth and berm will be installed 6 months from the Planning Commission's approval, followed by 1 calendar year installing the plantings, and subject to the Planning Commission approval of the types, locations, and the number of plantings to be installed. Did I miss anything, Kyle?
I'm good if everyone else is good on the team.
I didn't know if I missed anything on the last part that you said.
Mr. Gore, that sounds correct to you?
That sounds it's better than what I came up with, so thank you.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have support?
Yeah, I support that as they stated.
Ms. Rector, would you call the roll, please?
Okay, I just want to make sure we have, Joe made the motion. Did
Correct.
Kyle second it with the amendments, or did
Jeff seconded?
Jeff seconded, Kyle just made the amendments. Thank you.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Gore.
Aye.
Mr. Wilson.
Aye.
Mr. Dersch.
I think you broke up there, Mr. Dersch.
Aye.
Mr. Anger.
Yes.
Mr. Lake.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right. Now the final topic, the fence variance.
I've butchered 2 already, so somebody else can take a crack.
Joe, you're doing fine. Does anyone want to make a motion on the fence variance? Just to kind of reiterate what we were looking at was the fence variance was to be replaced by berms on the east side and by the ditch along Smith Road or the south side.
Wouldn't that have already been covered in the last variance regardless? Because we approved a earthen berm with planting.
Correct, but another part of the ordinance requires a fence. So the berm was part of the screening and fence was a separate requirement.
Okay.
The ordinance actually is interpreted as to require both, or could require both. So you might want to say something to the effect that in consideration of the applicant creating the earthen berm and installing plantings upon the earthen berm as ultimately approved and determined by the Planning Commission, the requirement for the fence in the areas designated as submitted by Mr. Jacobs on behalf of the applicant would be eliminated. The fence would be eliminated in consideration of the earth and berm and plantings. I think that's where you were headed, but and you can shore it up from there.
Mr. Dersch?
I just had one quick question, I guess, regarding this fence is, by us bypassing this ordinance and granting a variance, there's no responsibility on our end or the township's end should someone become injured, for example, by the property that's unauthorized. It's probably a silly question, but I just want to make sure that there's no reason that we should consider something, falling back on us for not requiring the fence around the property for safety purposes.
Well, the township is cloaked with governmental immunity. We're not aware of any dangerous or ultra-hazardous activity taking place there. In other words, it's not a quarry operation that is inherently dangerous, and the requirement of the fence is not around the entire perimeter of the property, as dictated by what the boundaries of the property with the wooded area, the wetlands, the creek, and so forth. So I'm not concerned with the liability issue. It was more of a security issue. Usually is more of a security issue to ensure the safe operation of the in this case, the industrial site. So I'm not concerned with the liability. Again, it's not an ultra hazardous operation with an attractive nuisance that would necessarily attract people to that, like a quarry with water where people might want to gain access to go swimming and things of that nature. Hopefully that'll answer your question.
Thank you.
And furthermore, Kyle, to further answer it, I would state that the whole concept of the earth and berm and the plantings and doing extra plantings and close to each other, although it would not necessarily prevent foot traffic from gaining access to the site, but it would be an impediment or a deterrent of motor vehicles accessing the site. But keep in mind, foot traffic can access that sign whether or not there's a fence there, and they can access that site on the west boundary through the wetland area and the wooded area elsewhere. So again, further support for the fact that I'm not concerned with liability if the board chooses to go in that fashion.
Thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
Goldsmith.
All right, I think I can take a crack at it. So I would move to grant the variance to allow the proposed 3-foot berm and mix-up planting barrier as submitted in the existing roadside ditch in the depth of the right-of-way to provide a natural barrier to prevent unauthorized access and dumping to serve as the requirement in place of the minimum of a 6-foot in height fencing of the entire perimeter of the property. And I'm open to any friendly amendments.
Or if someone would like to support, Mr. Dersch?
I would like to just throw in one friendly amendment that any change in the wood line location or any additional wetland delineations or things of that nature that would affect the relationship between the berm and the wood line to provide that limited access needs to be reviewed, and an approval needs to be sought to make that change when that time ever comes.
Good point, and I'll accept that amendment.
amendment. Do we have support?
I'll provide support if everyone else on the team is not seeking any other amendments.
Doesn't see as if there are any other friendly amendments, so I'll ask Ms. Rector to call the roll.
Mr. Gore,
Support.
Mr. Dersch,
So, aye.
Mr. Wilson,
Aye.
Mr. Anger,
No.
Mr. Lake,
Yes.
motion
I'll
carried.
go back and say aye. Didn't I say support? I apologize.
Support, aye, yes, I think it all works, so.
Okay.
All right. Motion carried then. All right, well, we'll go into the next item on the agenda, which is public comment. Seeing that there are 4 numbers that do not look as if they were here before, I'll ask if there are any folks on the phone that would like to make a public comment. Please just state your name and address for the record. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Welling.
This is Jim Jacobs from Jacobs Architects. Just a point of clarity or question related to the approvals and a word of thanks to appreciate all your effort in reviewing this and allowing us to continue on to the next year. But my question is in relation to the timing. If I understood that correctly, it's 6 months after approval of the Planning Commission, correct?
6 months, the earth in the berm must be installed. 1 year after the Planning Commission, you have to install the plantings.
Okay, so just to let you know, we will probably need to make some amendments to the site plan and then look at the submittal deadline requirements. So we will make every effort to have the amended site plan for review for either the July, hopefully the July meeting, and then would look at to be the worst case scenario, the August meeting for having that, depending on our timing of getting everything amended and prepared and submitted properly.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Seeing that Mr. Jacobs was the last one on the phone, we'll move on to the next part, which is board and staff comments. We'll start with staff.
I just wanted to remind everyone that the next meeting will actually be Tuesday, July 13th due to the holiday. At this time, we do not have any applications. However, the deadline is not for another 2 weeks. Have a good evening, and thanks for everyone working so hard at the items tonight on the agenda.
Thank you, Ms. Rector. Mr. Goldsmith?
No comments. Thank you all. And your attention to detail.
Ms. Ingram?
I have nothing. Have a good evening.
Mr. Kohler? Oh,
I have nothing.
oh we're past public comment.
I'm sorry. I think it might be Mr. Churchill calling back. He did make the comment that he would like to speak at the end. So
okay.
I don't know. That's your call as the chairperson. I just wanted to, I saw the number come up.
Okay,
You should allow it.
We'll allow it. Yeah. Mr. Churchill, is that you?
Yes, hi. For the record, Tim Churchill appearing on behalf of Mulch King. I just wanted to thank the board for their exercise of discretion here today, and I just want to let them know that Mulch King does remain committed to working out issues with the township. I know this has been a very challenging parcel to work with, challenging issues. Basically, with each border seems to be laced with practical difficulty throughout this project. But I just wanted to again assert that Mulch King is committed to working out issues with the township. This is kind of a one-of-a-kind business in the township, and one that probably could not legitimately operate without a few exceptions to the existing ordinances. And again, I thank the board for their exercise of discretion today to allow this to proceed on to Planning Commission. And I fully 100% agreed with Mr. Goldsmith that we did still need variances to proceed to the next level here. So I just thank everybody for their consideration in this matter, and hopefully this will turn out to be a very very successful endeavor for the community as a whole, as well as the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Churchill. All right, we'll finish with board and staff comments. I think I was on to Clerk.
I have nothing.
And since they're in the same frame, Mr. Anger,
Nothing to add.
Mr. Wilson,
No, I just apologize for my technical difficulties tonight. I have my IT guy coming over. I'm working from home still, and the IT guy's coming over in the morning, so.
thank you. Mr. Gore.
I just want to say thanks to everybody. I love being on this board. You guys are all great, bearing with me, getting through things. We hash things out. It's all friendly amendments. So I appreciate all the work that all of you guys are doing, and thank you. I'm really enjoying being on this committee.
Mr. Dersch.
Again, just want to thank everyone for their efforts tonight. I know we've had some challenges going through some of these, and just working out the details with everyone as a team. I really appreciate everyone's input and support on getting through these.
I appreciate it too. It's a good group. This is an easy group to work with. And Mr. Gore, one thing, you definitely got courage to go ahead and make motions. And you know what? You just learn by doing it, and you're doing it. So
trial by fire.
That's right. All right, and that is the last thing. So I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
With support? In favor?
Aye.
Aye. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Right.
Thank you.